Today we're going to talk about the coming collapse, 2025 to 2032, somewhere in there, and why that is because of the flame return pulse. I'm going to talk about what the flame return pulse is and what we can expect. First up, just to acknowledge, I obviously didn't do a video from the weekend. I'm just catching up now. Our family's gone on a massive relocation from Taranaki, North Island, down to South Island, Wanaka. It's been super intense, 10 days of packing up the house and then driving and then getting caught up in a whole lot of crazy weather. Elementals really rocking things hard, and the wind and the fire, and I think we've had everything. So yeah, it's been really being thrown through things, but I'm pretty exhausted. But I did want to get this video out to keep the weekly momentum up at least. So thank you for your patience. Also to announce that Vault 000 has been safely relocated and is now anchored in Wanaka. And so Vault 00, the Krystic Quantum Financial Operating System, and the root node for all other vaults of the Krystic governance system and the Krystic, let's call it architecture of the New Earth templates, seeded. And yeah, looking forward to Egypt in the end of November, start of December, where we look to start the big one, Vault 001. When Vault 001 opens in Egypt, if we're successful there, then we've got a big flame architecture open, and that will be the opening domino that starts the rest of the vaults and the rest of the vaults around the world, and start to really bring that kind of Krystic consciousness flame back into our planet. So that's enough on that. Let's talk about the flame return pulse. This is an exciting topic. What I want to do first up is, talk about kind of different, say, let's call it cycles of time. I want to talk about how things operate in terms from a let's call it a more spiral lens. Time doesn't work linear. Time works through spirals. The Krystic Spiral Map shows us that time isn't random. It moves in these spirals. Each spiral carries with it intelligence. And within these spirals of these cycles, there's the return of the Krystic flame. The Krystic flame is the living current of source that often passes through into Earth's field from different periods of time. During these different epochs of time, through these different periods of time, what it does is it resets Earth's distortions, and it's here to restore coherence. So I think we're in a pretty exciting time because the flame is here now. The flame return pulse is at its most intense time between 2025 and 2032. This is going to be a real key time period where this real concentrated wave, right, of purity, of God's consciousness has coming into the time-space matrix with the original design codes, right? The original design of creation, calling us all back into alignment, calling our systems back into alignment, calling the inversion back into alignment, calling us individually. It's going to work on the macro, and it's going to work on us, the micro. It's going to look to collapse anything that is not true. So as you're probably aware, if you've been watching these videos or you're new to this, we're living in an inverted reality, an inverted society. Everything is inverted. What is meant to be designed is actually held up in hierarchical design of extraction. And so the flame return pulse is going to be humanity's question time. Are we ready to hold the flame in our entire society? So what it's going to do, it's going to come through and rip out anything that is not true. So during this time, this is why I'm saying in the title here, is that this is the window where collapse is likely to happen. Now, when we see and witness collapse, no one gets a bit fearful. It's just to know that, hey, we're going to be okay, but if we're going to rebuild something true, things have to collapse first. So during this kind of 7-year heartbeat window, this is going to be the strongest intensity for Oversoul descent. These are the years where the flame is going to burn the hottest, and any distortions, right, are going to surface. They're going to surface urgently, right? Because what's going to happen is that we've got this incredible opportunity to embody our multidimensional selfhood, right? It's this ignition point. this cosmic in-breath where Source, God, is drawing humanity closer to our original design, to our true design. And it doesn't just suddenly end either in 2032. There's an afterburn. There's another integration phase of another 11 years. So it's going to keep rolling through on the tailwind on that till about 2043, 2044. And so that period's kind of like the exhale of the same breath, right? The purification fire is still super active, but it's a little bit slower, less overwhelming, more focused on stabilization. So that'll be the stabilization phase. What's going to happen is that any structures, any patterns, any lineages that maybe survive the initial blaze are tested. If they carry distortion, they'll collapse there. If they carry coherence, though, they're going to strengthen. And so this is where the embodiment of both us individually and us as a society collectively will deepen into a new lived culture, because the culture we currently have of this inversion is not what's going to carry us forward, right? Our potential is to move into a Krystic civilizational blueprint. We've lived this way before, 52,000 years ago, before the fall. In the fall, we've been fractured, and slowly within that, we've had mirror fields and mimic fields come in and start to take over kind of the consciousness on the planet, which has set up these inversions. So if we're able to move through successfully, a new culture will materialize from the burn-off that's going to happen. Think of it like a flame of Source. Anything that is in the flame doesn't get burnt because you've already got the flame. Anything that's distortion, right, and not the flame, is mainly what we call the mimic field, the consciousness that copies the light, or the mirror field, the consciousness that reflects the light. Those things will start to burn and drop away. Most of the mimic finance, mimic economy, mimic kind of education, health, all the systems in the world that we all know are all inverted. This is when they're going to get the blowtorch to them, because people are going to start to feel this flame coming through them, and they're going to start to sense that this isn't true, and it's going to start to be let go of. So consider it in these different pulses, okay? How these flame return cycles come is that they work in a particular way. The flame return pulse works through these different windows. So the first window is the hot flame window, what I've mentioned before, 2025 to 2032. This is where this flame that's coming in, the Source consciousness, God's breath, right, is coming. It's feeling urgent. It's not negotiable, right? It's going to surface up shadows really, really quickly. It's going to collapse timelines. Embodiment is going to accelerate, right? It's going to move everything forward very, very quickly during this 7-year window. It's going to be pretty exciting when you can see through the veil and you can recognize what's happening. It's going to be quite scary for those that don't, because all of the structures that they see their life has become tethered to, connected to, is going to start to fall away, and they're going to start to question everything. Then, as I mentioned, the integration wave will last until 2043, 2044, meaning that even if someone resists now, that they may still feel this pulse to pull into alignment in the afterburn that's coming. And then the whole completion of this window, the lattice completion, is where we're going to determine, will humanity stabilize a Krystic epoch? And that's going to go through to about 2064. 2064 is the completion of the lattice, and then the Source is going to ask, have we stabilized into a Krystic civilizational blueprint? Is the culture of a Krystic civilization embedding, or will another corrective pulse be needed in a few hundred years? So that's kind of how it works, because we're always working through these, cycles of purity and distortion, right? And, if we look through history, these cycles of purity and distortion, they alternate like tides, right? When humanity drifts too far from Source, right? If my little light here is Source and we drift too far from it and distortion deepens, right? All these false templates take a hold, religious dogma, right, masquerades as kind of like some divine laws, synthetic grids, right, are all around us posing as spiritual progress. If we're living too far and artificial timelines, and we're too distracted from embodiment. All our soul memories fragment. There's fear, there's control, there's separation, are the dominant themes, like right now, right? In these moments, when it's at the peak, is when a flame return pulse becomes necessary. So what Source does is Source sends the purity flame to cut through this fog and burn away all this accumulated debris that we're all seeing in the world right now. Now, these pulses don't take out free will, but they'd clear the stage, right? They make it easier for humanity to choose alignment. And so this is why these flame return pulses, often historically, if we look at them, they've coincided with the fall of empires, the collapse of distorted systems, and the surfacing of a lot of hidden shadows, because what comes up is a collective reckoning, right? What looks like chaos is often the purification, right, of a flame return. So if we take an example, let's look at the fall of Atlantis. The fall of Atlantis was 12,000 years ago, okay? And here's when we saw technology outpace spiritual responsibility. And I don't know about you, but it's kind of a little bit of echoing of that going on right now, right? With the advancement of artificial intelligence, humanity is beginning to outsource so much of responsibility to artificial intelligence, which has no tethering to source, which is a artificial consciousness field, which can be useful for us, but we can't make it our new God, right? It's kind of happening now. Same thing happened in Atlantis, right? What happened is that the flame return came at that point in the form of a cataclysm, right? Where water and fire cleared out the civilization, and we ended up having a massive resetting of the grids, and this massive destruction kind of created these fragments of Atlantean wisdom were carried into different civilizations, right? Epochs of Atlantis carried into Egypt, carried into Andes, carried into these other lineages to seed the next spiral. It was really the kind of the clearing of the big clearing of the decks that moved everything through. Another time the flame return pulse came was the time of Yeshua ben Joseph, what many call now Jesus the Christ, right? So in this epoch of time, 2,000 years ago, this was the peak of this kind of religious legalism, this kind of empire rule, right? And so what happened is the flame return pulsed through the embodiment of one person, through the Christos consciousness coming through one being. And what his ministry did is it carried the flame purity as a direct remembrance of God within for people. He was here to show us that God is inside of us, right? And of course, later the distortions came on the Bible and the teachings that distorted them to say, oh, no, but only he was the Son of God. It was all nonsense and control. So what happened is that the distortions of his teachings into dogma showed that sometimes, shadow will often follow. But the flame itself seeded the entire planet with this beautiful remembrance of love. Another flame pulse was, 500 years later, the collapse of Rome. Rome grew on and grew on and grew on and became such a massive controlling force in the world, right? An empire of kind of excess, right? And its fall coincided with a flame return pulse. It cleared out the old and opened, space for new spiritual streams, although they were still mixed with shadow, come through. We saw monastic traditions begin to evolve. We saw hidden esoteric schools, right? And the hidden esoteric schools retreated and kept the flame alive, sort of secretly, hiddenly, throughout the Dark Ages, when humanity went through from the fall of Rome, 5th century, for about 1,000 years, right, until we hit the Renaissance. And so when the Renaissance came, that was another flame return pulse. And the Renaissance brought renewal of art, science. It brought back human dignity. It was kind of, Source bringing through this incredible flame pulse of creativity, knowledge. And what it did is it broke this kind of stranglehold of religious control. That was a flame return pulse in action. And then the last major lattice of the flame return pulse actually seeded this current arc we're in, right? This whole 20th century upheaval where we've gone through world wars in the 1920s, etc. We've seen the collapse of empires. We've seen this massive exposure of collective shadow come up in the form of wars. We also saw this simultaneous return, this re-emergence of occult knowledge, right? And that started to come up in the late 1890s, early 1900s. We began to see the emergence of some of these esoteric teachings make their comeback. And while there was also purification through a lot of blood, right through war, which was all very devastating, it all set the stage for the current epoch we're in, right? This next window of the flame return pulse, 2025 to 2032. This is why now is going to be super intense, right? Because each flame return pulse doesn't just simply repeat the last. What it does, because time doesn't work in a linear or a circle, it works in a spiral. In a circle, as they try to program the mainstream of society to believe, time's circular, it just keeps repeating. It doesn't, because it means you'd just be repeating. It actually works as a spiral. So you get to repeat things, but from a more elevated viewpoint. So each time you come back around, you do it from a more elevated perspective. So, for example, on one turn, Atlantis fell. And so that the fragments of truth that might have been around could be preserved. The next spiral flame return pulse, Yeshua embodied the flame so that Krystic consciousness could never be truly lost. He was able to show us that God lives within us. The Adam Codman template can be inside of us, fully activated and alive, right? Consciousness and God the God spark is inside of us. And then we had Rome's collapse. And as Rome collapsed and the Vatican's power disintegrated a little bit and pulled back a little bit, it allowed a lot of hidden mystery schools to carry the codes sort of secretly through the dark ages, through the shadows. And then the Renaissance opened up science, opened up art, and helped us to reawaken our memory. Then we'd had the previous one, 20th century, shattered empires, right, and began to seed a global consciousness that began to happen outside of religion. So here we are. We're at this next turning, right? The purity flame is returned once again. But this time it's different, right? We're not here to seed fragments. What the theme of this spiral of the flame return pulse is to, invite full oversoul embodiment, but not just in an individual like it was 2,000 years ago, on a planetary scale. This is for everyone who is serious about embodying their oversoul, who wants to hold the full luminosity of the God spark and full essence within them, right? We're going to start to see this beautiful, change, because what once now has previously in cycles called for collapse is now calling for both collapse and co-creation. This is about us, humanity, aligning with the flame not to survive like it did before. Because if you think about the flame return pulse, it was all these basically, the big purge would come with the flame return pulse, and fragments of the flame would branch off and regather and re-embed themselves in different parts of society to rebuild once again. Right? It happened with Atlantis fell. It seeded Egypt and the Andes and other various places. Pockets of that consciousness went and held memories. And then things built up. Then there's another collapse, and those memories fragmented further into other memories. And we started to see the fragments of the flame, of the Krystic current begin to build up. There's these little pockets around the world. Now, what we're being called is not to fragment to survive, but to build the architecture of the Krystic civilization. And that's what we're being called to now. Yes, there's going to be a collapse. So, I'll do a video maybe in the weekend about, AI collapse. There's going to be a collapse of AI, just as there was with a tech boom, right? People are going to start to lose that kind of allure with AI that's currently hot right now. But all the major systems that hold the world together, things need to change. This is not a Krystic template. we need to rebuild a Krystic template. Every flame return, the invitation is exactly the same for you if you're watching this video. How does that affect me? All right. It's all about your embodiment, right? So what's going to happen is that on a personal level, this pulse is going to start clearing distortions in your DNA. It's going to start awakening dormant strands of your DNA. It's going to allow those DNA strands, because each DNA strand acts as a gateway frequency band into that corresponding dimension of consciousness. What does that mean? So if you think of, you've got these different 7 chakras you're probably aware of, and these chakras have different wavelengths. Each wavelength is a different faster frequency band. You've got more than 7. It's the 7 is kind of your personal chakras. You also have morphogenetic chakras, 8th chakra here, 9th chakra, the mouth of God, 10th chakra, 11th chakra, 12th chakra, 1 foot below the earth. And then beyond that, if you're accessing Rishi consciousness and it's looking at that scale, 13, 14, 15, 13th chakra you share in the center of the earth, 14th chakra above, outside of the earth, 15th chakra outside of the earth below. So these different wavelengths. Now, in a 12-dimensional consciousness construct, our DNA works like this. As our energetic portions of our DNA begin to unlock and unwind, and what the flame return pulse is going to do is going to take out the distortions, the implants, and the various mechanisms that got implanted into our DNA from these ET races that wanted to control us. And the burn off from the flame return pulse is going to start to clear these out en masse. Previously, we've had to override them manually. You've had to sort of clear these pieces manually. Of course, most people don't understand DNA architecture deeply enough to do it properly. So the flame return pulse is going to take care of that. And so what's going to happen is that let's say someone's got, say, strands 3, 4, and 5 open right now, and they are accessing their soul consciousness because your soul resides on those dimensions. As you start accessing more your oversoul, strands 7, 8, and 9 will begin to unlock, and then you can start suddenly receiving the wavelengths of your consciousness on dimension 7, which is a certain wavelength, dimension 8 a slightly faster one, dimension 9 a slightly faster one. These are the wavelengths where your oversoul is residing. And then as you start to build those frequencies, those wavelengths of 7, 8, and 9 inside of you, your oversoul can drop down the more you purify. The more you clear out the mimic field, the more you clear out the mirror field. Your oversoul can descend, because ascension isn't you leaving Earth and leaving your body and going out there somewhere. All the dimensions of consciousness happen in here. And as you start to increase the wavelengths of light held in your biological form and your auric field, your oversoul can start to live further and deeper into your body. So what I'm saying is a flame return pulse is going to make this happen on scale for people. The people who are also taking a bit of care and aware of what's going on and choose to consciously work on this will go even faster. And then as we start to sort of map out into the collective level, what's going to happen is that the pulse begins to open up these different scroll zones on Earth. And what's going to happen is that this is going to release codes that humanity needs for a next stage of evolution. It's like us taking a group to Egypt in December. We're going to go and open Vault 001, and all of a sudden the codes that have been locked up for 52,000 years of the Krystic civilizational templates will be building a morphogenetic field around the Earth that people will begin to tap into. And then there'll be Vault 2 in France, and then Vault 3 in the UK will happen in these coming years. More and more of these codes humanity will be picking up on, and more people will be starting to download and integrate them into their DNA templates. As these codes come as these wavelengths of these Krystic consciousness codes come into their field, into their DNA, once your DNA is vibrating at a certain level and your biophotonic light emission lights up, it's like sometimes you'll hit a pocket and you open up a zip file, and suddenly on that zip file, there's a whole packet of information that was previously closed to you, massive download, a whole lot of information that needs to integrate, and you've got suddenly a bigger piece of awareness in a particular area of life, depending where you're choosing to, focus your energy. If you're an engineer, suddenly a whole new way of engineering. if you're a scientist, it's a whole new download of way of looking at your particular branch of science. Your particular scroll in your Oversoul will lead you forward as to what your purpose here is on the planet. The zip files will begin to open in your DNA. You'll begin to receive the divine revelation of the inspiration, right? Inspiration, inspired, in spirit. You will start to receive in spirit the information that you need to fulfill your purpose. I love that quote by Patanjali, right, who wrote the original Yoga Sutras several thousand years ago. When you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations and your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself to be in a new, great, wonderful world. Dormant forces and faculties become alive, and you find yourself to be a far greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. Yeah, I love that from Patanjali. Always looking for a chance to weave it in somewhere. So, on that collective level, these zones and these codes and these scrolls open. On a planetary level, we start to see the strengthening of the Krystic grid. The synthetic overlays that are currently around the world everywhere, they're going to start losing their grip, right? So at the moment, we've got synthetic overlays of mimic and mirror fields running the systems. Most of the people in power are being driven by these mimic mirror fields. They're going to start dissolving. We're going to start to reestablish, let's call it more organic architecture. So this is one of the reasons that right now, some people and many people are feeling pushed, right? What's happening is that the flame that's coming through from source is opening the space for your oversoul descend, to drop into your body. And that pushing is your oversoul trying to come in. But as it's doing that, it's going to bring up to the surface every shadow that's blocking descent, every fracture that's blocking its descent. And the flame is going to show you exactly what's ready to be dissolved so you can carry more of your eternal self. It's all being brought up. And when you can see things clearly, it's important because then you can witness it. You can stop being victim and you can start to sort of see things clearly. When you can see things clearly, you can witness them, you can move through them, right? So every flame return isn't a repetition. It's a spiral ascent. We've got to think. Atlantis fell, allowing its fragments to be preserved. Yeshua embodied the flame, so the Krystic consciousness could never be lost. We had Rome's collapse, right? Allowed the hidden schools to carry the codes through the Dark Ages. The Renaissance opened the arts and the sciences. The 20th century shattered empires and seeded a more global consciousness outside of religion. Now, this time, the purity flame returns, not to just seed the fragments, but to invite a more wider planetary oversoul embodiment. Just excuse my family's just got home, so I'll just keep getting through this. Just don't mind the back chatter. We're still setting up our house. What once required a full collapse alone, that was needed in the past. It's not needed now. We've got enough to regather the fragments of flame and build a civilization we can call home, right? We're being invited to align with the flame, not only to survive, but to build the architecture of our Krystic civilization, right? I'm not going to lie, though. During this window, 2025 to 2032, it's going to be the most intense pressure. It's the white, hot fire of pure source consciousness flooding into our planet. So lots of purification, lots of dissolving, and it's going to clear anything that's not true, both for you, for me, individually, and collectively, for everyone. So if anyone who's committed to their spiritual evolution, this is great news, right? Because it's in this window, you can go faster than further than ever before. Now, it's not necessarily going to be easy. It's going to be intense, kind of like, right, birthing a baby. But that baby is the more higher, more evolved, more refined, and potentially, right, on your path, even Krystic version of yourself. So that means letting go of anything that is not aligned with that 12th dimensional current of the Krystic intelligence fields, right? And so when that's kind of there, this is our potential of what's coming. Ready or not, it's coming. It's how you handle it is what's key. Let it go, let it dissolve, let it burn, and allow what's true to rise. We need to do it individually, but let's also do it collectively. Anyway, we're in the middle of unpacking house and boxes. I mean, you probably see still got everything everywhere. I managed to get a workstation set up. Hopefully we get the home set up a little bit better in the next week or two, and we can get a little, maybe going to try and make maybe a little bit of a nicer setup for my little ramblings on YouTube once a week. Hopefully we can get some nice backdrops or something going on. I'll try to do something. But in any case, it's good to be landed here in Wanaka. Vault 000 is active, alive, and looking forward to all that's coming. In the meantime, sending you all of my love, and I look forward to catching up with you in a few days or next week. Goodbye.